everybody, Rix here, and in this video we're going to go over how the RixCanDoIt Quick Transfer Paper works. I think this is very important, especially if you're into image transfers and you want to use this paper, because by knowing how it works, if you run into any kind of issues whatsoever, by understanding how the paper works, you'll be able to troubleshoot what your particular issue is. Now, if this was just a one-trick pony paper, that it only did one thing, and that was to transfer on unpainted wood that was flat, you wouldn't be able to transfer onto fabric and glass and tile and canvas and all these things which you can do with this paper, then you wouldn't have to worry about how it works or whatever, because it just does one thing. But when you have something like this paper that allows you to transfer to almost anything, as long as you understand how it works, then if there's any kind of issues or whatever, you'll quickly know how to remedy that problem. And that's the goal of this particular video. All right, so moving along, let's talk about this paper. This is simply regular printer paper. It's just printer paper. It's paper you stick in your printer all day long. You can print on it, whether it's an inkjet or a laser printer, it doesn't matter. Now, it does matter for this particular paper that you use a laser printer, but it's still just plain printer paper. And I'll explain the laser printer part in a second. So here's this regular 8.5 by 11 printer paper, but on one side has this transparent coating. Now, when you get this paper, you might actually see on the edge some of that coating extending off the edge. We take off as much as we can, you know, when we package it and everything. But, you know, it is made here in my residence. It's not mass produced. It's all handmade. There's a lot of labor involved here. I wanted to make this paper available to everybody. It was originally designed for my own crafts work, but I said, hey, I was making it anyway. I make it available to you guys. All right, with all that said, you might see a little bit of it. You can scrape it off, whatever, it doesn't matter. But you put it in your laser printer so that it prints on the side that's coated. So you have your paper, as you can see here in the illustration, and on top of it, you have your transparent printable coating. And use a laser printer on that coating. Now, why not an inkjet? The inkjet uses wet ink. This transparent printable coating is sensitive to moisture. If you get it wet, it gets weak and it starts to release from the printer paper. So you'll end up with part of your inkjet image embedded in the paper itself, the printer paper, leaving you with a more faded transfer. Yes, you can do transfers with an inkjet, but it won't be as deep colored and rich as it would be with the laser, because laser uses a dry toner. It's not wet when it's applied to the paper, and it's ideal for transfer paper like this one. So that's all this paper is. Printer paper with a transparent coating that you can print right on that coating. So use a laser printer and print your image right on the side that has the printable coating. We have marked the paper on one side that says print on the other side, so you won't print on the wrong side. Okay, now what about the surface that we want to transfer onto? Like I said before, you can transfer onto wood, fabric, glass, tile, canvas. You can do it on painted surfaces, unpainted surfaces. The whole rule of thumb is if the glue you are using can hold on to whatever it is you want to transfer to, then you'll be able to transfer an image to that substrate. But you got to make sure that you know that the glue you're going to use will hold on to the surface of whatever it is. If you've got some kind of silicone surface, which hardly nothing seems to stick to, and you put glue on there, you may not get a transfer to go on your silicone because almost nothing sticks to it. It's like Teflon. It just, everything comes off. So know the glue you're using, whether when it's dry, it will stay on the substrate. If you know that, then you know the transfer itself will stick to that substrate. That's all you need to know when you ask the question, hey, can I transfer onto this tile? Can I transfer onto this fabric? Can I transfer onto this glass? You can answer that question for yourself. Put your glue on it, take a regular piece of paper, any piece of paper, glue it on, let it dry, and see if you can get that paper to come off. You probably can't. And if you can, that means you're able to pull the glue off that substrate, and that would cause you a problem even with the transfer paper, because the transfer paper will be able to pull that glue off just like any other kind of paper. So keep that in mind. All right, so the glues and adhesives, you can use gel medium, you can use Mod Podge, you can use wood glue, you can use spray adhesives like 3M77. There are myriads of adhesives out there. So basically for me, most of the things that I transfer onto, whether it's unpainted wood, even painted wood, fabric and such things, I often will use gel medium. However, there are some things that, for example, when I'm making one of those printed t-shirts or something, I'm not going to use gel medium because it'll wash off in the wash. So what happens is I'll use the 3M77 adhesive spray, and I can make me some, image transfers onto my t-shirts and stuff that will, stay on even in the wash, because 3M77 doesn't wash off. Now, so anyway, you just need to test your adhesive to the surface. Once you know that the glue will work, then use it. Use that to put the RixCanDoIt Quick Transfer Paper onto it. You're going to glue the paper like you glue any kind of paper. There's no rocket science to this. If you can glue regular paper, you can glue the QT paper as well. All right, once you lay that glue on, take your printed transfer paper, image down, plop it down onto that glue, and then make sure you have good contact. If you don't have good contact, how are you going to glue the paper onto the surface? If you don't have a smooth surface and you have grooves and stuff, if you can't get your thumb or finger in there to press it down into those grooves, there's going to be no contact. So remember, you've got to have good contact. I like to use a brayer to press that on really good, and then you want to maybe take a hair dryer while you're rolling it and just roll it and heat it so at least it gets good contact initially. Then once you know for sure that you have good 100% contact of that paper onto that substrate, whether it be glass or wood or whatever the case may be, you can leave it out to dry 24 hours, a week, a month, a year. It doesn't matter. There's no time period as to when you have to peel the paper off. How about when it's time to release it? Well, if you know that you have completely dried that paper onto that substrate, whatever it happens to be, now what you need to do is be able to peel that paper off. And the only way you're going to be able to peel that paper off is if, one, you weaken the coating that's between the paper that's holding the image. You have to weaken it, and it gets weakened by adding moisture. By adding moisture to the back and letting it soak in, it's going to cause that coating to become weakened, and it will allow a separation of the paper from the image. But for that separation to happen, something has to hold that image while you're doing the separation, and that's your glue. If you have good glued contact of that image, that glue is going to win the tug of war. That paper is going to come off, and it's going to leave the image glued onto your surface. If you're able to pull any of that image off, okay, and it doesn't stay on your surface, and you notice, hey, I just peeled this off and the parts of the image is still on the paper, that's because that parts of the image was never glued to the surface. There is no way on this planet that that paper should have ever been able to be peeled off if it was actually glued on securely. For those parts of the image that stayed on that paper, it never was adhered to the substrate, and so even a weakened coating was strong enough to pull that image off. This coating is not glue. This coating just absolutely goes to mush when it's wet, and there's no way you should be able to pull that paper off if you had good contact, good glue contact. So remember that anytime you pull that paper off, if you're able to pull the paper off, it took a part of the image with it, that paper was stronger than the glue. And you know that glued paper does not come off. It does not peel off. Just remember that. Glue a piece of paper to something and see if you'll be able to peel that off. It ain't coming off. We're going to talk about the separation and release here. The coating loses its hold on the image, allowing the image to be pulled off the paper as long as the glue has a stronger hold. The glue has to be stronger than the coating. Otherwise, the coating is going to win the tug of war, and it's going to take that image with it unless that image is glued on. Now, here's the thing. If you don't moisten this paper, let's say that you feel you didn't put enough moisture on it or whatever, and you're saying, well, this is why the image did not transfer over because it had a stronger hold in the glue. No, if that coating isn't properly moistened and it has a strong hold on that paper, if that glue itself was applied properly and you had good contact, it's going to also have good contact, and that paper is not coming off. You're going to actually tear the paper and leave paper behind on your substrate. There is no way you could release this paper if it is glued properly and you didn't moisten that coating. It's just going to leave the paper there until either one or the other gives. Either the coating gives by moisture or the glue gives because it was too weak and it wasn't properly applied and it didn't have proper contact. It's very simple. Again, if you got to get a visual in your mind, get a regular piece of printer paper and glue it to your wall, glue it to your book, glue it to whatever you want, let it dry, and then tell me that the paper was able to be peeled off. It can't come off. You'll have to soak the paper like crazy, rub it to death, probably rub your wall to death or whatever the case may be. It just will not come off because you properly glue the paper. The quick transfer paper is no different. If it's properly glued, either the paper stays on that surface because you didn't release the coating, but if that paper is able to peel off, that's the key. If the paper is able to peel off because you moistened it and it peeled right off like butter, but it takes any part of that image with it, that area did not have proper contact, did not have proper gluing. You have to remember that's very important. There's absolutely no way that paper should ever peel off unless it was moistened, and the glue itself, for example, is holding onto the image. It's going to hold onto the image. All right, you can test it for yourself. All right, so if you properly glued it and you allowed it to dry and you had good contact, your image will transfer. It's going to come right off the paper. The paper is going to peel like butter. You're going to go, wow, this is fantastic, because you don't have to rub and rub and rub and rub, possibly rubbing off your image and all that with those crazy methods. This is the easy way to do image transfers. All right, so let's go over transfer issues, because from time to time, I notice some like to make full page transfers. I do a lot of smaller stuff, but some do full things, full block of wood or whatever, and they'll send me some images, and maybe they'll leave a little bit of the image is missing on the transfer. It's on the paper itself. It came off with the paper. So for that, let's talk about that, okay? If any part of the image does not transfer onto the substrate and remains on the transfer paper itself when you peel it off, this is caused by poor gluing. properly glued paper cannot peel off. You can't peel off glued paper from anything. Unless the glue itself won't hold onto whatever it is, you can't peel the paper off. And this is no different than the transfer paper itself. I have the suggestion here, try gluing a regular piece of paper onto a substrate, let it dry and see if it peels off. Not a chance. It just will not peel off. That's how glue and paper works. The only way for the paper to peel off with the image not transferred is if the glue itself peeled off and didn't hold on to whatever the surface is. So when you peeled it, the glue went with the paper. Okay, so obviously it didn't adhere to whatever it is you are gluing onto. Or the image was not glued to begin with. When you do these full page transfers, you're over here putting glue all over here, you're brushing it on, whatever the case may be, and while you're over here in the right corner, over in the left corner, it's been sitting there for, who knows, half a minute to a minute, and it may start drying. Or if you look at it in the light, you should see a nice glimmer of white glue, or whatever it is you're using as adhesive, and you may see areas where you missed. And this is common. The bigger the area you're going to transfer onto, the more possibility that you've missed something. Maybe your eyesight isn't so good and you didn't see that it was drying over here, or you just plain missed it with your brush. Or when you apply it with your finger, okay, you didn't realize you didn't catch the whole area. Or when you were doing the application, you were scraping glue off at the same time. Some brushes will do that, and you'll see these lines because you're pulling glue off the surface. So you have to make sure that you completely cover it with glue. Now, don't add too much glue, because what happens when you put paper, any paper, onto a really wet, gluey surface? It wrinkles. It's just too wet for the paper, and the paper starts to shrivel up. Now you're trying to roll this thing down and it's bubbling and it's making these bubbles, because super wet paper, well, one, it's going to start releasing that coating prematurely because you just soaked it with glue. So you just want enough just so that you have something to use to glue the paper down with. We'll just say gluing the paper instead of gluing the image. You need enough that will glue the paper when dried onto the surface. You want to make sure you have 100% coverage, because areas that do not have glue will not hold the paper in that area, okay? And you don't want too much that you're soaking the paper and it's curling and bubbling and you're constantly rolling it, pushing it back down, it's popping back up, you're pushing it back. I've seen it all right? So just understand you're gluing paper. You're just gluing paper. And I have to reiterate it again, very important. The substrate surface should obviously be clean and relatively flat. I say relatively flat because I've transferred onto slightly rough surfaces like canvas. Canvases are not flat. They got a little bit of texture to it, right? But I get perfect transfers every time on canvas, as long as, of course, you make good contact. It comes right off. You see my videos on canvas. So relatively flat. And if you do have wavy areas, that's fine, as long as you can get your finger in there and press it down in the grooves, because the brayer may not go down in there. So keep that in mind. You want good contact. Use a glue or adhesive that you know will hold onto that substrate. If you have any question mark whether a glue will hold, test it first. You need to be able to just glue regular paper onto whatever that surface is, and if it will hold like cement, that paper, any paper, if it will hold it on there, that glue will work. That's all you need to know with that. Make sure you make good contact. The image can only transfer to where it is actually glued to the substrate. Be sure the glue is completely dry. It has to be stronger than the paper coating when wet. Talking about when the transfer paper is wet. Otherwise, the image won't be left behind. So when it comes time to peel, if you're able to peel that paper off that substrate, either the glue came off the substrate or the coating released its hold. There's no other way that you're going to get paper to just peel off a glued surface. It doesn't happen. Those are the only ways it's going to happen. Glued paper cannot be peeled off at all. If you are able to peel off the paper, this is because the coating released it and it released the image. Because remember, the coating is between the paper and the image. So the only way you're going to be able to peel that paper is if the coating released itself from the image, because the image is glued onto the substrate and the coating is weakened by the moisture. It comes off and leaves the image there. If the gluing is poor or non-existent, it's going to take the image with it. If the glue itself isn't holding on to the substrate, it may even take the glue with it. Very simple common sense once you understand how this works. And I mention it here, otherwise the glue itself came off the substrate and went with the paper, assuming there was glue there in the first place, or assuming that it didn't dry before you actually applied the paper onto it. Okay, so that's it for the RixCanDoIt Quick Transfer Paper, how it works. So if you run into any issues whatsoever, think about it, how it works, why didn't the image not transfer 100%? You should know the answer to that now. And of course, I'm always here if you need my help. I'm always glad to help people out. All I ask is, that you go over this again if you miss something and understand how it works, because my answers are usually going to be the same thing that I just said here. Take a regular piece of paper, glue it with your choice of adhesive. If it holds that paper and won't release it, then you've got the right adhesive for the substrate. But if you're able to pull that paper off, it's coming right off that adhesive, or it's pulling the adhesive right off the substrate, then you've got the wrong kind of adhesive. And again too, anywhere there's no glue or bad contact, you're not going to be able to have that image come off the paper onto that substrate. So you have to keep that in mind as well. All right, well, thanks for watching. If you haven't done so already, please subscribe to this channel. I have more things to come in the future, other projects and so forth. And well, there you go. And I'll see you in the next video. Thanks for watching. Bye.